Alastair, good day to you, my dear friend, and welcome here. Always a pleasure, of course. The G7 meeting in southern Italy 2 weeks ago, was that conducted for any ostensible purpose other than election optics?
Yes, I think it was. It was setting the scene very clearly. It was always focused on Ukraine, and it was focused about more money and about more weapons for Ukraine, and about a security pact with Ukraine. And all of these things really spelt one thing, that there was an expectation of escalation. And I know that this is indeed the expectation of an escalation in Ukraine is firmly entrenched in Russian thinking. That's what they think. Lavrov was very clear on that. And so you have to understand that, and in the sense that this is the context. I know a lot of people have been very excited by what they call a peace proposal coming from Putin. I think it wasn't exactly a peace proposal as such. I think it was much more the last saloon, last chance type of offer. He can see that escalation is coming. He can see too, and he knows that this next, if you like, stage of escalation is going to be extremely dangerous because that it's aimed at the Russian people, at the Russian state. And we've had, over this weekend, just for example, of course, an ATACMS missile full of cluster munitions. These are little fragments that spray out as it lands, landing on a beach near Sevastopol in the Crimea and injuring many, many people. Lots of women, children, everyone in there bathing. The videos of them all rushing to try and attend to people who've been wounded in this video. There were 5 ATACMS FAD, 4 were brought down by the defense system. And this one, I mean, the question is open as to whether it was intended to land there or whether it was not. By coincidence, there was also a big American Reaper drone just off Crimea during this whole process. And if you look at the video of it, you do see the drone actually seemingly going in one direction and then doing a kink back and arriving on the beach. But that's not enough, because we've also had, in this time, another Khorasan ISIS supposed attack on 2 quite separate towns on the Caspian, southern Russia. And they attacked and they slit the throat of a priest in one Orthodox church. They attacked another Orthodox church, and they attacked a synagogue as well. This is clearly, this didn't come out of nowhere. This is coordinated, planned, and it has all the hallmarks really of what we saw with the Crocus concert hall back a couple of months ago, where the concert hall was so damaged.
We're looking at, let me just interrupt you for a minute, Alastair, forgive me. We're looking at the attack on the beach. You can see people sunbathing and umbrellas and lifeguard stands in the foreground. In the background, you see the result of the attack. The Russians know that this was American hardware and American ammunition that brought this about.
They've said it. The Ministry of Defense, who are normally very restrained in their language, said this was an American attack orchestrated by the United States using United States intelligence and surveillance facilities to perpetuate it. Because they simply don't believe this was done by the Ukrainians. There might have been a Ukrainian that pushed the final button, but the whole process of targeting it, the feeding in the coordinates into the machine comes from NATO personnel. And with the ATACMS, it will be American personnel that are doing it. So this is the first time. I've only seen this once before. You won't recall it probably, but there was a time some time ago in Syria when an Antonov, a plane, a Russian intelligence plane, was shot down by an S-300 of Syria because an Israeli F-16 was using it as cover to come in to attack a target in Syria. And the Russians, initially, the Kremlin was very cautious about what it said, and they said this might have been just a mistake. But the Ministry of Defense in Moscow came out and said clearly this was murder. The Israelis led our people to murder. They used us as a decoy, and that the S-300 struck the Antonov instead of the F-16. They planned it. And I saw subsequently the Deputy Minister of Defense sometime later. And he said very plainly at this meeting, he said, it was murder. And in the sense, I think these sort of same feelings, the Ministry of Defense were quick to set out a response to this. And they said, this is done deliberately, and it is done with American equipment and American operatives doing it. And then we have the Khorasan. So what I'm talking about is all around we're seeing an escalation taking place. And it's an escalation which, was targeting refineries. It's been over the weekend, it was targeting refineries. Before that, Russia's over-the-horizon radar. It seems clearly intended to try and provoke Russia into some sort of counter-reaction, which is, of course, what Zelensky and Kiev wants, because they want to try and find the means to pull at this sort of sensitive time. Because all of the G7 was about, posturing for the election, that that Biden is tough, he stands by his allies, he looks after them, and he's gathering all the Europeans, corralling them into support for Ukraine and the project there, indeed in the longer war. And I think the point here, going back to how Putin is seeing this, so he's not only seeing the escalation taking place there, first of all, but he's also seeing, and Lavrov almost said this explicitly, is saying he's also seeing that, and you see the language from Europeans preparing for a longer war, sort of a further timeline against Russia, a European war against Russia. And that's why we're hearing all these talk about conscription and how people will be required and Europe will start to industrialize and, if you like, rearm for this. And then also Putin understands the situation in the Middle East could explode into something that could draw Russia into it. If for example, there is an Israeli incursion into Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah. Partly that might well extend to Syria, because Syria is part of the arms route that goes through to Hezbollah. Not the only one, by the way,
right,
but one.
Right.
And so it could, and that could bring Russia in. So when he looks at this, and people say, well, have you got a peace process or a peace offer? He says, look, this is it, and by the way, if for any reason, Kiev refuses it or you don't like it, well, that's up to you. I mean, it's not the sort of way, he didn't try and sell it to anyone. He said, listen, it's on, there it is. This is your last chance because escalation is coming. Don't complain to me. I put it on the table. You have your chance. Take it or leave it. And he said very clearly, I'm not interested. He said, I want to underline, he said, emphasize, I'm not interested in a frozen conflict. I'm not interested in a ceasefire or some form of quiet, because really all that is doing is preparing the ground for Ukraine to be rearmed by the United States,
right,
to get rearmed, and we're back to where we were. in 2014. So he said there's only one way, actually, to end this conflict.
Here he is just 4 days ago in Vietnam, reminding everybody about the peace agreement, which was signed by the Ukrainians, signed by the Russians, rejected by the British and the Americans, cut number 6.
An outcome of our talks in Istanbul. Why no one remembers that? I said that 100 times. We had an agreement. The document was signed by the Ukrainian representative as well. It means that the agreements reached in Istanbul were acceptable for the Ukrainian side. So what happened on the ground, on the battlefield, that now allows them to make any additional demands that had nothing to do with the talks in Istanbul?
Well, he's right.
This is why it wasn't a real proposal. I mean, this was, I can see escalation coming. I realize how serious this is, given the gravity of the circumstances. Here is what could be done to stop the situation developing. It's up to you. Take it or leave it. It's on the table. It will only be worse. If you leave it, it will only get harder. He didn't expect it to be taken up by anyone, because anyone who looks at the situation in the whole can see that America and Europe are not in the frame of mind for accepting a peace proposal anyway up till November. But beyond that, even then, it's not going to happen. This is why he said very clearly, there's only one way to resolve this. There has to be a resetting of the security architecture. That is an agreement between the United States and Russia about the limits of their security interests, how far they reach, where the boundary is, and the boundary between that and the heartland, Russia, China, and Central Asia. A modus vivendi between, if you like, these two spheres. That is the only way. If that is settled, then the Ukraine takes care of itself, because that will be part of that understanding a new security architecture for the Europe and for the world, for if you like, the NATO, the limits of where NATO. This is what was never done at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The verbal agreements were given, and then those verbal agreements were forgotten. And right. NATO has been forever expanding and forever expanding. And the main purpose, and he says, the root of this problem, and he said this, he hinted at it several times, the root of this problem is that there has to be a change in the mental attitude, not of United States as a whole, but of the ruling elite, of the ruling strata in the United States, who are still stuck in the Cold War mentality, who still think, that Russia is a gas station in a desert and nothing else, and has no real strength. They cannot accept, as they did during the Cold War, of any sort of giving any esteem to Russia as a potential partner, as someone that they can work with as a partner. No, Russia has to be diminished. It is something that literally sort of fell off the American interest and has been treated with sort of sneering disdain by these elites ever since. And so I think quite understandably, Putin says, I just don't believe it's possible to do a deal with these people. They won't even talk to us. Right. How can we do a deal?
I want to show you a full screen with a statement from Defense Minister Sergei Lavrov in response to these attacks. I'll read it. The U.S. is responsible for this massacre, and they will get an answer. All flight missions for American ATACMS missiles are programmed by American specialists based on their own U.S. satellite intelligence data. Therefore, the responsibility for the deliberate missile strike against the civilian population of Sevastopol, that's the beach scene we just showed you, lies primarily with Washington, which supplied this weapon to Ukraine, as well as with the Kyiv regime, from whose territory this strike was launched. Such actions will not go unanswered. Alastair, that was yesterday. That was Sunday, in response to the attack on civilian bathers on a beach. I'm going to suggest to you, and then I'm going to suggest that you agree with me. He means what he says.
Absolutely. This is what that speech by Putin was all about. Escalation was expected, is expected, and it's going to be ugly escalation. Like the, again, Khorasan ISIS. Come on, we all know who runs those. Suddenly appearing on the Caspian seashore, slitting the throat of an Orthodox priest, killing others, attacking a synagogue. These things are not, I don't believe, I've been in geopolitical world too long to believe in coincidences. It's obviously intended to provoke Russia to do something that will escalate it further, so that, if you like, the United States can show that it is being tough and facing down Russia in the lead up to these elections. But it goes beyond the elections. It's quite clearly, from what is being said in Europe and what the Europeans are saying, that the order has come down to prepare for a more full-scale war with Russia, perhaps in the next 2.5, 3 years ahead. Possibly one that would mesh in or coincide with a possible attack by America that is being mooted on China. And that the European part of this was to escalate and prepare for, if you like, a wider conflict with Russia at the same time. I mean, we've heard this from so many different people.
Right.
This is not just coming out of the blue. I mean, the Europeans are all talking about conscription, talking about weapons, talking about money, I mean, every day demonization of Russia. I mean, another step up.
Of what conceivable benefit to the United States would there be to such a war by the West against Russia?
Well, absolutely none to the United States as a whole. But if you're talking about that strata, that leadership strata that have taken us through this period, the Wolfowitz strata, that determined that there should be no challenge to America ever, that America would establish a hegemony in the post-Cold War era. To that strata, to that elite, I think they're getting desperate. And Putin sees that too. He said, the security, the Western security architecture is crumbling, is dissolving before our eyes. And he sees, that the United States has big problems now in the Middle East, possibly a major war starting. And he sees that there's problem on all fronts for this, if you like, the elite of the elite, the insiders that determine these sort of policies. And we don't know, who is it? Who is it that is sending this order down to the Europeans to prepare for war with Russia?
Right.
No European want it. It's not in a European interest to have a war with Russia at all. Quite the converse.
Well, why
Look
is
at the elections that have come?
Why is the United States authorizing offensive weaponry to attack civilians in Russia?
To provoke, to turn this into something that is much, when people get desperate, and I think some of the one particular class of America, because I don't think Americans want war with Russia or China as such, or any war, like the Europeans. But there are those in America who are desperate to sort of keep the hegemony going. And the only way they can see it is the usual one: divide and rule, chaos. Out of that chaos, we will, look even now. I mean, when we're looking at Ukraine and a peace process, all the grain, all of Ukraine, actually now mostly it belongs to BlackRock. I mean, all the grain, all the agricultural land has been sold off by Zelensky to BlackRock. It belongs to American corporations. They're invested in this too. So there's, big money interests, big military industrial complex interests in a bigger war. Wars always bring huge profits and the chance to plunder other countries. Well, they've already plundered Ukraine, but they want the chance now to rebuild it after they win the war, as they assume it.
Is this the reason that the United States State Department, Tony Blinken, will not speak with the Russian Foreign Ministry or Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov because they do want to provoke them into a war?
Of course. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. I mean, if you don't build up, an ability to talk, I'm not opposed to talking, when I say this isn't a peace process. I mean, of course, I would like to see peace in Ukraine. It's just I have to, I've been through these things in many different ways before, and if the circumstances are not right, you can actually make things worse by trying to provoke a sort of to do a peace process. We've seen that just happen with the American White House, with the White House. It's botched attempts to try and force an agreement on Hamas and on the Israeli government have actually made it worse. Now there's no communication really between, if you like, the Biden White House and Netanyahu and his government. It's stopped, and we are on the brink of a war there that will be, could widen and could be catastrophic for those involved. So, I mean, this is what's happening. So they don't want any communication. They don't want people to say anything. The horror that came out when Nigel Farage in England, he said these forbidden words, and they almost swooned in the UK because he said, no, the problem in Ukraine was started by NATO's expansion. What? You horror!
Is he the only prominent British politician saying that? Does Sir Keir Starmer say that?
No, they say the opposite. Oh, it's Russia's fault. Unprovoked, illegitimate invasion of wait for it, of a democratic European country.
Oh, good Lord.
What a confection of lies. Anyway, so yes, they don't want, their narrative to be questioned. I think when people get frightened like this, I've always found that when people get frightened, they feel things coming apart. They've been used to being in a little secret society of like-minded people. And then suddenly things start to go, and they look down and they see, there's nothing below them. They're over the cliff. There's a void. What is going to sustain them? Where's their next career move coming? Where's their next sort of appointment to some military company coming from? Where's the magic carpet? It's all been pulled from us. They get frightened. And so they want to keep the old system going as long as they possibly can because they feel comfortable in that sort of tight embrace of being part of a secret cabal that is plotting the future of the world.
You recently wrote in one of your articles, quote, equal status between Moscow and Washington is out of the question, close quote. Does the State Department not respect Moscow, the Kremlin, as an equal superpower?
Absolutely not. It treats them with disdain and sneer. It sneers at them. What is Russia? It's a failing state. And they still believe in that old Cold War imagination that somehow, what's happening now, the beach incident, the attacks on the churches on the Caspian, all of this will force, Russians will say, what's going on? Putin has lost his grip. He must be weak. We will have to do something to connect it. We must put in someone else in it. They still think it can lead to the dissolution of Russia into its constituent parts, and then BlackRock can come in and take, more of Russia as well as Ukraine. Only it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at all like that. Now, there is going to be, I believe there's going to be a riposte, but Putin will consider this. He is like the resistance in terms of Israel, very carefully calculating the escalatory ladder and how to control, if you like, the height of the flames as the conflict expands. The conflict is underway. We are in a war. We're at war now. And how to manage that is vitally important. So he will be calculating that. But there are, and I just want to say this because lots of people then say, but that'll end up with a nuclear exchange. It won't. Putin understands there are many, many steps, financial, trade, as well as technical, as well as military, that Russia can take before ever getting to the question of the dilemma of a nuclear weapon. It won't happen. In my belief, it's there. But the most dangerous thing of this issue is because the West doesn't believe it. The Financial Times writes, this bluff about nuclear weapons. We don't take it. It's all wearing thin, these threats from Putin. It's all wearing thin. We can safely ignore that, and we can go on escalating because we know that he would never use it. Well, they're wrong. Very and dangerously wrong, because that is not the case, that it can end up in a nuclear exchange if it gets out of control. And this is what, this whole talk, the address by Putin to the Foreign Ministry Board was about, saying, look, things are going to escalate. It's going to be ugly. So I feel bound to explain why we've got to where we are and to say, this is the last chance. If you don't take it, it's up to you, but it's only going to get harder to have a solution in the future.
Do you foresee a time in the near future where the Ukrainian war is over, where Ukraine collapses, or you don't think these European powers would allow that to happen?
Oh, I think that I could think that could happen at any time. And so we have, this is the thing that makes it so hard, and which I don't predict, because, it was Macmillan who used to say, when someone asked him, what do you fear most in politics? And he said, events, dear boy, events. And yeah, it could implode. It's very close to imploding. So it may change. And that will be part of Putin's calculus also. Is this, are they going to be able to continue? They're suffering huge losses on the battlefield at the moment, and things are not working. I mean, the military side of it is a disaster. So they can only resort to these things of firing at beaches and attacking priests on the Caspian Sea and other things which they think is going to cause the Russian people to get agitated. Actually, it has the opposite effect. I saw that. I was in Russia shortly after the Crocus. Actually, it made people much more resolute. They knew they were in a war. They're in a war. There will be casualties. We know that, but we have to win this war.
Alastair, my dear friend, thank you very much. You're passionate this morning, and it is deeply appreciated. We have a short week next week because of American Independence Day, the 4th of July. You know what that is. That's the British election
day. Exactly.
We'll see you, I trust, next Monday. Have a good week. All the best, my dear friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you.